Next on this special edition of Currents News, what's next for President Trump? With 4 weeks to go to Election Day, questions are swirling about how his campaign will have to adjust to his COVID-19 diagnosis.
He'll probably do quite well despite the fact that due to his age, he's in one of the higher risk groups.
Infectious disease specialist Doctor Robert Taballi talks to Currents News about the president's positive test. Plus, before his diagnosis, President Trump and his opponent courted the Catholic vote at this year's virtual Alfred Smith Memorial Foundation dinner. And Pope Francis visits Assisi this weekend to celebrate the feast of his namesake. The news starts right now. I'm Christine Persichetti, and welcome to this special edition of Currents News. We're bringing you this week's top stories important to the Catholic community. We begin with prayers across the country for President Trump and the First Lady after they tested positive for COVID-19. They are under quarantine at the White House. The President and the First Lady are experiencing mild symptoms, but both are said to be in good spirits. The question now is, what impact will this have on his campaign so close to Election Day? Currents News' Emily Druby has the latest.
The October surprise that was a surprise to everyone, even the president. He and the First Lady testing positive for COVID-19 just 32 days away from the election. This could be a big blow to his campaign, as political expert Brian Brown from St. John's University explains.
An important part of the Trump brand is public rallies, outdoors, lots of people, and that has now been taken away. So this really changes the dynamic.
The week leading up to the diagnosis, the president was busy on the campaign trail, appearing in New Jersey, Minnesota, and of course Ohio, where the first presidential debate of 2020 was held. The White House says he did travel to New Jersey after learning one of his top aides, Hope Hicks, had tested positive.
It was deemed safe for the president to go. He socially distanced. It was an outdoor event, and it was deemed safe by White House operations.
Since his positive test, he removed himself from the campaign trail. Events have been canceled or made virtual. For now, his campaign strategy remains a mystery, as does what will happen to the second debate scheduled for October 15th.
Perhaps it could be moved remotely. If we don't have the ability to judge these candidates on stage like we have during a normal campaign, it's really a disservice. It's a shortcoming of the campaign.
Now, as the campaign works to stay on track, political analysts are arguing the diagnosis goes against much of Trump's recent COVID messaging.
He wants to get the conversation away from COVID-19, and this keeps it front and center.
There's one question on everyone's mind: if the president is unable to continue on the campaign, especially since many ballots have already been sent out, what happens?
That's really would be almost unprecedented. And any votes that have been cast for President Trump would go to the Republican nominee, who in this case would almost certainly be Vice President Mike Pence. God willing, we don't come to that point.
Speaking with Fox News' Sean Hannity, President Trump suggested Hicks might have contracted the virus from meet and greets with the military and law enforcement. Emily Druby, Currents News.
There are many questions about just how much the president's health will be impacted by the positive diagnosis. Earlier, my colleague Jessica Easthope spoke with Dr. Robert Taballi, an infectious disease expert at the Catholic Medical Association. She began by asking him about the president's recovery, since he's in what is considered the high-risk group.
Technically, he is, by reason of his age, in the high-risk group. He's a little bit overweight, not grossly overweight, but so patients who carry a lot of extra weight, their increased risk carries through, and it's related to the 40, 50 pounds of extra weight that they may be carrying in fat. He doesn't have diabetes, doesn't have high blood pressure, doesn't have heart or lung disease. So chances are that he'll probably do quite well, despite the fact that due to his age, he's in one of the higher risk groups. He's going to have to quarantine for at least 10 days. Now, he's tested at least once a day and probably on the order of 4 to 5 times a day. And the fact that his close advisor, Hope Hicks, was not feeling well and had some nasal stuffiness and a little low-grade headache, she got tested and was positive. And then, therefore, he was tested because she's in close contact with him. Now, we would expect that he would do well, hopefully.
And the president is believed to have mild symptoms right now. We know this virus really affects people differently. What could that entail for him?
Well, mild symptoms would include some nasal stuffiness, a bit of a sore throat, mild headache, just a feeling of general malaise, maybe some muscle aches. Some people have a cough. Other people can develop a high fever or diarrhea. But the mild symptoms are normally very similar to what you might have with a spring or summer cold that you might get.
And what about the First Lady, someone who does not typically fit into that high-risk category? What does this diagnosis mean for her?
Well, I believe she's 50 years old, although she looks younger. And so most of my patients that are in similar fashion with her that have gotten ill with COVID do very well with only symptomatic relief, including pain relievers like Tylenol. So they normally do very well.
And we're about a month away from the election. The president is obviously running a campaign, has to be very active. If he doesn't make as swift of a recovery as he hopes, how could his campaign be affected? Would we have to do everything virtually instead of being out in person with voters?
Well, clearly, if he wants to maintain his schedule right now and he's physically able to do so, the early word is that he's really doesn't have significant symptoms. He could continue virtually. We would advise him not to exercise because the heart can get affected in this situation. The doctor that is caring for him, the White House physician, had previously prescribed hydroxychloroquine for him. We don't know if that's going to happen. A lot of the world literature appears to be that that's helpful if started within the first 3 days of infection, which certainly the president is within. So it all depends. A lot of people, after they recover, even if they've got a relatively asymptomatic infection, can have significant fatigue. And so the demands of a campaign like this are very taxing and tiring and fatigue producing. But he should be able to resume his normal schedule if he does well in about 10 days.
And speaking of those preventative measures, President Trump has had mixed feelings about wearing masks. His campaign has held large rallies during the pandemic. If you were his doctor, would you feel that he put himself at a greater risk?
Well, by virtue of his position, he puts himself at great risk because he has to receive so many people. And as we all know, you can't get within 6 feet of the president unless you're a very special person. He has signed things and shaken people's hands and so on. And he did not use masks early on, but this is an infection he's acquired within the past 7 days. And clearly he's been wearing masks quite frequently recently. He's had a bit of a conversion on the use of masks. Hopefully his vitamin D levels are adequate because that's very important to do well with coronavirus. And he appears to be in excellent health otherwise.
And Dr. Taballi, lastly, what advice would you give the president in the coming weeks and months?
Well, I would tell him to take it easy. He seems to be someone who doesn't sleep that much, and he's going to have a need for sleep in his recovery. Virtually everyone, even if they're asymptomatic, has significant fatigue, and taking naps is not a bad thing, even for someone with a schedule as demanding as he has. That's really about it. His doctors will evaluate him, make sure he gets his influenza vaccination, make sure that he doesn't have any post-viral bacterial infection, with sinusitis or bronchitis that can follow something like this. And they will check to make sure he's not at risk for clots. Patients, even with asymptomatic infection, can sometimes trigger a cascade, which could make them at increased risk to develop a blood clot in their leg or vein, and I'm sure they'll follow him closely for that.
That was Dr. Robert Taballi of the Catholic Medical Association. And on Friday evening, the White House said that the president has been treated with a single 8-gram dose of Regeneron's polyclonal antibody cocktail. He's also taking zinc, vitamin D, melatonin, and a daily aspirin. Former Vice President Joe Biden and his wife Jill have tested negative for the virus. Earlier, the Democratic presidential nominee tweeted, "Jill and I send our thoughts to President Trump and the First Lady for a swift recovery. We will continue to pray for the health and safety of the president and his family." Vice President Mike Pence and Second Lady Karen Pence also tested negative. The vice president tweeted, "Karen and I send our love and prayers to our dear friends. We join millions across America praying for their full and swift recovery. God bless President Trump and our wonderful First Lady." Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who recently spent time at the White House when President Trump nominated her for the Supreme Court, has tested negative for COVID. Meanwhile, Barrett's nomination is being praised on the right, but Democrats remain concerned about a 6-3 conservative majority on the High Court. And if confirmed, the High Court would have 6 Catholics. But even though she's not the first, her faith is a big topic of discussion.
I thought we settled this 60 years ago with the election of John F. Kennedy. But seriously, they're going after her Catholicism.
President Donald Trump defending his Supreme Court nominee, Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who he says is being attacked because she's Catholic.
I will stand with her, fight with her, and we will make sure that these attacks stop because it's unprecedented. They're basically fighting a major religion in our country. This is incredible.
It's nothing new for the conservative judge, who was asked how religion plays into her decision-making during a Court of Appeals confirmation hearing in 2017.
The dogma lives loudly within you.
But Barrett said while she is a faithful Catholic, her religious beliefs would not affect her decisions as a judge. She says she keeps her personal views out of the courtroom.
If confirmed, I would not assume that role for the sake of those in my own circle, and certainly not for my own sake.
When it comes to the issue of abortion, in 2013, Barrett said it was unlikely that the court would overturn Roe v. Wade. And in 2016, she said she doesn't think the right to abortion would change, but some of the restrictions would.
I think the question is how much freedom the court is willing to let states have in regulating abortion.
Meanwhile, 2 lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are defending Barrett over recent criticisms about her religious beliefs. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of Virginia said religion should not enter into the conversation. And House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, while not specifically mentioning Barrett by name, called the issue appalling.
I think as a nation, that's appalling that they would judge somebody by the faith that they have. We have freedom of religion.
President Trump wants to see Barrett confirmed before the election. President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden appealed to Roman Catholic voters at Thursday night's virtual Alfred Smith Memorial Foundation dinner. This year's event was dedicated to those helping fight the pandemic, and both candidates spoke of the selfless efforts by the Catholic community.
As Jesus Christ said in the gospel, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. As president, I want to thank the Catholic community for the magnificent generosity you showed in America's hour of need.
The president also highlighted his accomplishments benefiting Catholics, noting the hundreds of millions in federal pandemic relief that went to parishes around the country. For his part, Biden, who is Catholic, spoke about his faith.
And throughout my life in public service, I've been guided by the tenets of Catholic social doctrine that cuts across all confessional faiths. What you do to the least among us, you do unto me. We have an obligation to one another. We cannot serve ourselves at the expense of others. We have a responsibility to future generations.
The former vice president also spoke of how his Catholic faith helped him find a purpose to live a life worthy to all of those he lost. This year's election could turn on a critical voting bloc, the Catholic vote, but many Catholics are divided on the issues and the candidates. One thing's for sure, Catholics who live in key swing states will have a huge impact on who the next president will be. It seems that Catholic voters know how to pick a winner, whether Republican or Democrat. They've gotten it right almost every time since FDR. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the only exception.
They always seem to land on the winner when it comes to presidential elections.
This election, the Catholic vote is as important as ever, especially in pivotal swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio, where Brian Brown, professor of political science at St. John's University, says the election is expected to be decided.
When it comes to swing states, especially states with a significant Catholic population like Pennsylvania or Ohio, they're always sought after voters when it comes to an election.
Catholics make up 23% of the electorate, the largest religious denomination in the country, according to Gallup analysis. But Catholics do not vote as a cohesive group, making their votes critical and up for grabs.
The Catholic vote today is so diverse. wonderfully diverse, as is the Catholic Church, but also so polarized that it's really hard to predict.
Gallup data shows that white Catholics who are active in the church and lapsed Catholics tend to vote Republican, while Hispanic Catholics lean Democratic. But as the Hispanic community continues to grow in key states like Florida, David Gibson, the director of the Center for Religion and Culture at Fordham University, is now seeing that vote becoming more fractured.
You can't lump all Catholics together. In Florida, you have Cuban exile emigres, you have more recent immigrants from other parts of Latin America. They have very different views, also very divided, so they can provide the real momentum that's either going to carry the state for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death is also a factor, leading the presidential candidates to retool their strategies on abortion.
You will see the rhetoric get a little uglier, a little more extreme and intense. But I think when push comes to shove, this has always been a policy issue.
Amy Swearer with the Heritage Foundation, a D.C. think tank that helped assemble the list of potential Supreme Court nominees, thinks President Trump's pick will resonate with Catholics.
I think anything having to do with those individual liberties, I think is what's going to appeal most broadly to the largest number of people.
Both camps have fired up teams to go after the Catholic vote, but the candidates too are divided on a host of Catholic concerns. President Trump is solidly anti-abortion, which could attract single-issue Catholics, while Catholic candidate Joe Biden is not. On social issues like immigration, climate change, health care, and the death penalty, the Democrats' platform is more appealing to multi-issue voters.
There's no perfect system, church-ordained political system, but our constitutional democracy allows us to have these open and informed debates and elections in which we each take responsibility for the outcome.
There's a lot more news headed your way on this special edition of Currents News. Why more families are taking their kids out of public schools and enrolling them in Catholic schools. Plus, the Catholic Church has dozens of new members in Queens. We'll take you to the ceremony. And the Holy Father packing his bags. Pope Francis taking his first trip outside of Rome in months. We'll tell you where he's going.
Now you can help us put your faith in the news. The next time you capture a newsworthy event, send us your pictures or video. It's easy. Go to netny.tv/send us, and you may see your submission on Currents News.
This week, 500,000 public elementary students across New York City finally went back to school. It was a start date plagued with delays, but some parents didn't want to wait and opted to enroll their children in Catholic schools. Currents News' Emily Druvy takes a look at this growing new trend.
Helen's son is thrilled to be at school.
We love it. We are very happy.
He and his brother just transferred from a public school to St. Joseph the Worker Catholic Academy in Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn.
It was very good for them to be in school every day. One, because he has a lot of energy and a lot of eager to learn, the one in first grade, and the other one because he has a speech delay. So we thought for him it was good to be with peers so he could develop his learning capacities.
Helen wanted her children to be in class, and while Catholic schools have been in session for weeks, New York City's public schools in-person learning was pushed back twice. Principal Stephanie Gurman says they've seen about 125 kids come to St. Joseph the Worker from public schools this year.
The hybrid model doesn't work for many parents, especially if they have small kids in kindergarten, first grade, and they don't have access to childcare.
Many parents felt their kids were struggling to keep up because of distance learning, like Molly.
Morning, girls.
My second grader is struggling to read because we spent 6 months struggling. And even now, I just see her in 2 weeks in school, and she's really back on track and, getting her literacy rate up, which is amazing for me as a parent to see that.
While St. Joseph the Worker has seen perhaps one of the most significant enrollment jumps, they're not alone. Just last week, the Diocese of Brooklyn registered 274 new students, an abnormal number for this late in the year. School officials believe those kids came from public schools. This uptick comes during a difficult time for Catholic education. In 1970, there were about 11,000 Catholic schools in the country. That number has dwindled to about 6,000. Low enrollment is one of the main contributing factors. In the Diocese of Brooklyn this year, the population in 40% of their schools has either grown or stabilized. Now, officials believe this new public to Catholic school trend is a main reason for the change. In Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn, Emily Druby, Currents News.
40 Catholic schools have received the 2020 National Blue Ribbon Award. The honor, distributed by the Department of Education, recognizes a school for exemplary teaching and learning. Catholic schools won 80% of the awards issued to private schools this year. It may have been 6 months later than originally planned, but almost 6 dozen people of faith have finally become Catholics. The mass to induct the RCIA candidates took place this past Sunday at St. Michael's Church in Flushing. Around 70 people were baptized and confirmed by Brooklyn Auxiliary Bishop Raymond Geppetto. That liturgy was originally supposed to take place at the Easter Vigil. Bishop Geppetto had this message for the new Catholics.
I encourage them to be faithful to the promises that they make and to allow the Holy Spirit to guide them in their daily life. They are the apostles, they are the evangelizers, they're the ones that are going to go out and grow the numbers and bring in more people each and every year.
Of those 70 Catholics, more than half of them were Chinese, the rest were Latino. Still to come on Currents News, it's the first trip outside of Rome in months for Pope Francis. He's traveling to Assisi this weekend to mark the feast of his namesake. More on that up next. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Pope Francis is traveling to Assisi this weekend to mark the feast of his namesake. It's his first trip outside Rome since the pandemic began. He will sign his new encyclical at the tomb of St. Francis. Currents News' Emily Druby reports.
This weekend, Pope Francis is set to make his first visit outside of Rome since the pandemic put Italy on lockdown. It will mark a very important occasion, the signing of his new encyclical. The Holy Father is set to celebrate Mass at the tomb of St. Francis of Assisi. He will sign the encyclical right after. As Brother Joseph Bach of the Franciscan Brothers of Brooklyn explains, the trip, which is scheduled for October 3rd, holds deep significance.
He's going on the day that we celebrate the Transitus, or the passing of St. Francis in our Franciscan family.
Francis is the first pope to be named after Saint Francis. The encyclical is said to be on human fraternity, recognizing each other as brothers and sisters.
For Francis, this whole concept of fraternitas meant that we were all brothers and sisters, and without distinction, we were all equal. So I think it sends a very important message for the world and for our church right now.
Brother Bach adding it's a message that's especially important as the world deals with the fallout of the pandemic. Earlier this year, during his trip to Abu Dhabi, Pope Francis signed a groundbreaking document on human fraternity, along with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, one of the world's foremost Muslim leaders. This will be Pope Francis's third encyclical, naming it Fratelli Tutti, words that come from St. Francis. This is also true of the Pope's second encyclical, Laudato Si'. The trip itself will look very different than a normal papal trip. The celebrations will be private and not open to the faithful. Pope Francis will head back to the Vatican as soon as it has ended. In Brooklyn Heights, Emily Druby, Currents News.
And of course, stay with Currents News for complete coverage of the Holy Father's visit to the tomb of St. Francis in Assisi. We'll have much more on Monday on his third papal encyclical. And that is the special edition of Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.